Good morning. It is Thursday, October 21st, 2021. Let it be known we have another great show lined up for you this morning. But first, before we get to that, let's bring on the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr. Good morning, Dr. Chavis.
Good morning, Stacey Brown, and best wishes to you and to all those who are listening this morning on this bright and early Thursday morning. On behalf of Karen Carter Richards, our chair of the NNPA, and the 230 African American owned newspapers and media companies across America, we welcome everybody to this special edition of Let It Be Known.
And Dr. Chavis, the National Newspaper Publishers Association, of course, led by you, we spent a week almost in the Big Apple, in the city that never sleeps. And last night, there's a couple of things we're going to get to. But first thing we're going to talk about this morning, Dr. Chavis, last night, the National Basketball Association, the NBA, opened its regular season here at Madison Square Garden, up the street from where we stayed in New York. With the New York Knicks and the Boston Celtics. The Knicks defeated the Celtics 138-134 in double overtime. But the big NBA story is the refusal of superstar Kyrie Irving to get vaccinated. He plays for the Brooklyn Nets, and he has now left the team. The team says that he will not participate this year until and unless he gets vaccinated. And that brings us to a very, very interesting conversation between Charles Barkley, the legendary Charles Barkley, and Kenny Smith. We have a video here. I want to show you this video, this conversation. It's about 1 minute long. We're not getting volume on Charles and there, but in essence, Dr. Chavis, Kenny Smith had opined that it's Kyrie Irving's personal decision, which it is, but Charles Barkley took issue with the fact that the entire team is vaccinated except for Kyrie Irving, and he's still collecting half of his paycheck. And so we know that the NNPA has been staunch advocates of the vaccine and getting vaccinated to protect yourself. And what Charles Barkley said in this video, unfortunately, we can't hear it, but we see the words there. It says, first of all, you don't get vaccine for yourself. You get it for other people. He was explaining how you have to protect your loved ones, in this case, your teammates and everyone else around you.
Well, I think Charles Barkley is right. And I think that certainly the New York Nets player has his own personal choice, but you have to live by your personal choice. And I think that you can't put the whole team in danger because you make a personal decision that you don't want to take the vaccination. This is the problem with vaccination hesitation, and in this case, vaccination refusal. It puts a lot of other people in. You not only put yourself in jeopardy, you put other people around you in jeopardy. So the NBA team had no other choice but to let him go. But he's still on the team. He's still receiving salary. But I think that people should learn from that you have a personal responsibility, but you also have a social responsibility to others. And I think this pandemic is still deadly. People are still dying every day from this pandemic, and particularly in the African American community. And that's why we in the Black press, we continue to hone in on this, because we don't want people to take this lightly. This is a life and death matter. It's still a state of emergency in Black America around COVID-19.
Yeah, and we saw in New York City has a vaccine and mask mandate, and the Brooklyn Nets are following the city and state guidelines here with their actions. Kyrie Irving had offered to play road games where in other states and cities that don't have this mandate, but the Brooklyn Nets said, you know what, we can't allow that. Dr. Chavis, also in the news this morning, police watchdog has recommended the New York Police Department discipline 65 cops for misconduct during the protests that followed the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. The Civilian Complaint Review Board called Monday, or this week, I should say, for the NYPD to impose the the highest form of discipline available, known as charges and specifications against 37 officers for misconduct during the protest that swept the city after George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin on May 25th, 2020. And if found guilty after an administrative trial, those officers can face loss of vacation days, suspension, or even termination. They have recommended another 28 officers face discipline through additional training or loss of vacation days. So, we're going to talk this morning in a few moments with Elena Quintana, the executive director of the Institute on Public Safety and Social Justice at Adler University, who also serves on the independent monitoring team called the Community Engagement Team for the Chicago Police Department Consent Decree. We're going to talk about these specific issues. Certainly, she's going to talk about what's going on in Chicago, but we also cover what's been going on around the country as well.
Absolutely. And these civilian community police review boards, they're named different things in different cities, but it's very important that there be a civilian oversight of the police departments around the country, whether it's in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston, Atlanta. All these cities need some type of review board, and the review board should be controlled independently of the police department. It should be controlled also by civilians. Because keep in mind, the police are supposed to be public servants. They're supposed to be peacekeepers, peace officers, serve the interests of the community. Yes, protect the community, but not to brutalize the community, not to oppress the community. So this finding by the Independent Review Board in New York City is going to have implications, I believe, for the rest of the nation.
Yeah. Also, Dr. Chavis posing the question here: what happens when a parent at a school decides that a white parent decides that she doesn't like or appreciate the African art that a 10-year-old black girl has created? Well, I'll tell you what happened in Hawaii. The black girl, the 10-year-old black girl, was arrested, handcuffed in front of her peers, and handcuffed in front of faculty members. The American Civil Liberties Union of Hawaii is demanding policy changes after this incident there in Hawaii. In response, the ACLU sent a letter to the Honolulu Police Department, the State Department of Education, and the State Attorney General's office, asking them to adopt policy changes, expunge all records of arrest, and to pay $500,000 in damages for harm and suffering caused by their agencies. In January, a parent called the Hawaii Elementary School in Honolulu to complain about the drawing the girl made, and she demanded that the staff call the police. When the police arrived, the girl, who's only being identified because of her age as NB, was handcuffed with excessive force and taken to the police station. The girl's mother, Tamara Taylor, said she called to the school. She was called to the school, but not allowed to see her daughter or informed that the girl was handcuffed. In a statement from Taylor shared by the ACLU, the distraught mom says, "I was stripped of my rights as a parent, and my daughter was stripped of her right to protection and representation as a minor. There was no understanding of diversity, African American culture, and the history of police involvement with African American youth. My daughter and I are traumatized from these events, and I'm disheartened to know that this day will live with my daughter forever." What else can you say there?
Uh, Systemic racism is in all 50 states. And the fact that our young children have to experience this, you know, shame on the parent who called and demanded that the school system call the police. Shame on the police for responding to such a ridiculous call. Shame on the school board, the school officials. It shows that there's a systemic, deep seated racism in America that constantly has to be challenged. You just can't say that Black Lives Matters right after a tragic death. And we certainly not only have a right, have a responsibility to say that, but we are oppressed. These fatal matters happen not only in a physical sense, but also in a psychological sense, impact. And now this young sister in Hawaii is going to have to, overcome the trauma that was so unnecessary. But it also exposes how, for a simple artwork, I think the ACLU, I hope the NAACP also joins in this lawsuit. All of America should not let this family, the Taylor family, stand alone in Hawaii in this. This is a national disgrace.
Yeah. Dr. Chambers, want to segue to something a little bit more uplifting. The National Newspaper Publishers Association, as we said at the tops, has spent several days in New York City with Otis Williams of The Temptations as we watch this scintillating Broadway musical, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of The Temptations. And that, I tell you what, plenty of highlights, perhaps too many to recount for a review or feature news article, but we have several articles that you will see shortly on blackpressusa.com and many of our member papers. But the 2.5 hour masterpiece provided a microscopic view of the group from the lens of the legendary Otis Williams, who founded the Temptations, and he's the only living member remaining. Dr. Chavis, if you think you know the story, even if you watched the 1998 television miniseries, you really don't know it all, do you, Dr. Chavis?
Well, it was a masterpiece. I believe it's one of the greatest, the most impactful Broadway shows ever to be on Broadway. And the fact that it's a story out of the African American experience. Otis Williams, the Temptations, 60 years old, and there have been 24 members of the Temptations over several generations. And God has blessed Otis Williams to be in all of them. And the Broadway play is shown through his lens. And one of the questions that we were able to ask Otis on behalf of the Black press was the social consciousness of Motown music. What happens out of Detroit when the Temptations and Smokey Robinson and Supremes, Aretha Franklin, everybody comes out of this crucible of struggling for freedom, justice, and equality in the 1960s and produced this profound music that now has impacted all over the world. It's a testimony to Black art. We just talked about Black art, Black culture, Black music, but also the sense of perseverance. Uh, Otis Williams is a living icon, not just of the past, but how the past applies to today. The lessons that we learned from the 1960s have applications in 2021.
And of the many, many amazing reveals in this, the night that Dr. King, the day that Dr. King was killed, the Temptations were performing in Baltimore. They got the news, a public address announced at the arena announced it. The crowd was in tears. The Temptations were in tears, but they went out and performed anyway. But I thought an amazing fact that I didn't know. I don't know if you knew this, but the Temptations always stayed at the Lorraine Motel where King was killed, and Otis always stayed in that very room that Dr.
Same one.
King
That's right.
stayed in. So, a lot about this musical, Ain't Too Proud. It is an amazing. I tell you what, you're gonna love it. You should
And we should give a shout out, Stacey, to Marilyn Duckworth
Marilyn Duckworth
because
Davis.
Marilyn
Yes.
is the one that really helped us to get in touch with Otis Williams. And now I can just say on air, on Let It Be Known, there's a special bond now between the Temptations and the NMPA.
Yeah.
And we look forward to not only continuing to tell this story, because the play is also, once on Broadway, it's going to be a national tour. So there's a national tour of Ain't Too Proud. If you can't get to New York City, it'll be coming to your city. Make sure you see this phenomenal play.
Oh, absolutely. Dr. Chavis, Adler University's Elena Quintana serves on the community engagement team for the Chicago Police Department's consent decree. That's an independent organization, and she believes it is important to invest in both public safety and preventing crime. This morning, we welcome Elena Quintana. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. How are you?
Good morning, Elena. Thank you again for joining the Black Press of America. Your work there in Chicago is so important. There's a lot of um, view about Chicago, particularly the police department, has a long history, and to have an independent panel, independent group, particularly made up of civilians, is very, very important.
Yeah, and Elena, talk about this because I found this to be very fascinating too. The Chicago Consent Decree is the first one in the nation to be created by the public and not a legislative process. How important was that?
I think it's very important. There were a number of lawsuits that were leveled against the Chicago Police Department for their treatment of people, particularly following the Laquan McDonald killing. And a federal judge found that their case was compelling, and they basically suspended their lawsuits on the grounds that an independent monitoring team was created. So now we have an independent monitor. Her name is Maggie Hickey, and she compiled like a national team, to come into Chicago to provide monitoring for the consent decree that was created.
Yeah, and you mentioned too that it is important to invest in both public safety and preventing crime. I want you to explain that to our viewers because a lot of times it's either one or the other, right?
Well, many large cities depend, like, there are lots of people that have lots of kinds of crises and problems and issues growing up and getting out into the world and just interacting with people. And oftentimes we depend way too much on police as the only available form of intervention. When sometimes what we need is a counselor. Sometimes what we need is a good neighbor. Sometimes what we need is an outreach worker. And so, if we diversify the kinds of help and support we have, then we don't need to depend solely on police. Because when all you have is a hammer, everybody becomes a nail, and we end up investing in an intervention that unnecessarily criminalizes lots of people instead of investing in human potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's go into this too. We talked about this before we went live, Dr. Quintana. Um, the relationship between the police and communities of color, it overall has never been worse, at least not in recent memory, right? It continues to deteriorate. What can be done? What should be done?
I think that there's long been a negative relationship, particularly between communities of color and the police. But I think that the ubiquitousness of videotaping, of being able to, record what's going on because everybody has a phone, has really brought it to the general public's attention and brought it to all of our screens everywhere. And I think that that has raised consciousness around an opportunity that we have to change the course of history in our country by investing in a diversified kind of public safety. And that really is in investing in all people. In, good education is supporting public safety. After school activities is supporting public safety. Arts are supporting public safety. So when we diversify the way that we invest in building human potential, we are actively investing in public safety.
And Dr. Quintana, folks have talk with you. They've explained to you their misgivings, their problems with the police. Um, it's really, from what you've explained to me, it's really pretty elementary on how this could really be fixed.
Well, there's a lot of people that want to have a police force that they can trust, that they can trust to basically help them and not harm them when they are called. This seems very elemental. I went into a high school where a negative occurrence had happened that was all over. It went viral between a police officer and a student, and I did a number of focus groups there. And many of the young people, even young people who had been arrested or detained by that very police officer, um, said basically, we want a good relationship with the police. We don't think the police are going to go away. We want them to know who we are and to care about us as people. And that seems like a very reasonable request.
Yeah, yeah. We just want them to know us. In other words, if they got to know them, right, they would now look at them as who they are, right? Humans, people. Because every life, and I know Dr. Chavis has said this is extremely valuable, and certainly in communities of color where the lives are not typically valued, if they can show some value, if the police, if authorities can show that they do respect that their lives have value, we could start moving in the right direction. James Wright of the Washington Informer writes in that police intervention is too common. You need more mental health professionals. I want you to respond to that too, Dr. Quintana.
Well, as a clinical psychologist, I would absolutely agree with this. I do lots of work with people who have been caught up in the system, and I believe strongly that people have an ability to change. And when we promote a positive contact with people to help them become their best selves, they respond by becoming their best selves. So, the vast majority of people really want to build their own potential, and I think that we need to invest in giving them that opportunity.
And before I throw it to you, Dr. Chavis, just want to say good morning to our chair who's watching, Karen Carter Richards. Bobby Henry is watching down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And good morning to William Smothers from Speaking Out News in Huntsville, Alabama. Dr. Chavis?
Yes, and we're so glad that Speaking Out News has joined us, and appreciate the good work he's doing in Alabama. Let me just say that community policing, Dr. Quintana, should be the police department should be a part of the community, not an alien force that kind of surveys the community, corrals the community. Um, in Chicago, where you work now, is residents required? Are the police officers are they required to live in the communities in which they serve?
They are. They're required to live in the city of Chicago.
Yeah, but Chicago is so big. What I mean is the police officers.
Not in the communities that they serve, no.
That's
So
what I
there's
mean. Yeah.
often just these kinds of boroughs where neighborhoods where Chicago's police officers are really saturated in certain neighborhoods, but they don't often. But often, I mean, um, one thing to consider though is that they often get moved around as well, and this also makes it difficult sometimes for police to get to know residents.
Yes, I just think that the perception of the police for people who live in these communities, is that they're like an alien force, rather than a they're there to help and protect the community. As you know, in a lot of situations, uh, African Americans and other people they call the police for help, but yet when the police come, sometimes the person who actually called the police winds up losing their life.
That was the unfortunate case that was highly publicized on the west side of Chicago, and that is very unfortunate because it really does keep people from calling police when they may need them because they're so fearful of making problems worse. And obviously, that's something that needs to be different for people to have real confidence in their ability to help them.
Yes.
Yeah, and Dr. Quintana, again, I want to go back to James Wright of the Washington Informer, who says in the District of Columbia, only 16% of city police officers are residents. Is there a threshold that we, that your organization would be comfortable with as far as the percentage of police officers who live, as Dr. Chavis pointed out, not just in the city, because it's a big city, but within the general area in which they serve?
As I said before, that's tricky because if somebody gets assigned to one district, then they may get assigned to another district within the next year. And so people's positions, there's just so much turnover. And perhaps if we had more stability in community policing, there would be that kind of opportunity for people to form real relationships with the residents of the places that they are assigned to. But there's not that stability currently.
And so beat cops, for instance, if there's still a such thing, they get swapped out a lot as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in all sorts of, even our superintendent, I mean, just uh, in the time that this decree has been around, which has just been a few years, we've seen a few different police superintendents. So there's been a number of rotations in all of the levels of policing here, and that instability makes it difficult to form relationships and for good initiatives to take hold.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. J.
Stacey, can I just point out, and I think Dr. Quintana would agree, these dissent decrees are very important. Um, we would have never gotten the schools in the United States desegregated, and some of them are now resegregating without federal consent degrees. I think these decrees are so important. In other words, that when the federal government finds that the state or city is violating people's constitutional rights, the federal government has to move in and, force change, because sometimes racial discrimination does not end itself. Sometimes it takes the rule of law from the federal government to enforce cities like Chicago, like Los Angeles, and other cities who have these consent decrees issued. Can you just talk about the importance of what has happened in Chicago in terms of the rule of law?
I think federal oversight makes it feel. I mean, I think that there have been a number of attempts stated to do overhauls on, and to try to increase police accountability, but they didn't generally have any teeth. And when you have a consent decree that is under the oversight of a federal judge, that gives it a lot more seriousness and a different level of oversight than we've ever had previously. So I think that is very important, and it's a good opportunity to make a pivot towards something that could make a safer city for even the police that are patrolling it.
Yeah, and it used to be, and I know we're running low on time here, but Dr. Quintana, I know when I was growing up, there were a lot of police athletic leagues. There was interaction at the Boys and Girls Club with law enforcement in the neighborhood. Seems that has dissipated a lot. How important is that type of interaction between law enforcement and the community?
There is a small effort that is to interact between police department and the community, but I will say that people that are most affected by arrests are not the ones who are going to go play basketball with the police. There has been a great divide in this city, as there has been in many cities, where there is a distrust of the police. And I think that in order to really help public safety in general, we need to really think about how do we diversify investments in communities in order to create public safety beyond policing, but also make sure that there is the kind of civilian oversight of police departments so that there's a collaboration and so that the community feels like the police are a part of them and are being effectively served by the police rather than feeling less safe because of their presence.
Yeah, and finally, Dr. Quintana, uh, what's what progress? What do you see going forward? How much progress have you made, and what do you see going forward? What's your forecast?
My forecast is that I think the United States, lots of big cities in the United States, are going to see the opportunity to invest in community and to really help think about how to reach out to people who otherwise would have been cycled through the criminal legal system, and instead keep them in school, get them opportunities, get them jobs, get support that we need in order to rely less on the police, but also oversee the police so that they're a better force.
Absolutely. And Bobby Henry of the West Side Gazette says trust is built through positive interactions. Dr. Chambers, your close.
Well, again, I want to thank Dr. Quintana for your work and for the work of the committee there in Chicago. And we hope that in all of the cities, more progress can be made to improve relations between the African American and other people of color communities and police departments. Thank you.
It's been an honor to be here. Thank you for including me.
Our privilege, and let it be known. Check out the NNPA and the Black Press of America on TikTok at NNPA Black Press. Everybody, stay safe, stay well. And Kyrie Irving, if you're listening to us, come on, man, get the vaccine. Be a role model. We'll see you tomorrow.